So, welcome everyone. We're going to start off by very briefly introducing ourselves. You can look up the links if you want to know more about us. Just to say briefly why we're doing this workshop, we all love relationship astrology. I'm the co-founder of Relationships and Astrology, so it's always been my passion. And Alex, Carole, and I met at a wonderful conference by ASPAS in the Azores last year. And we started chatting and just said, why not? In fact, Alex invited us, said, why don't you come to the Algarve to do something? We thought that would be fantastic. I mean, it didn't take long, did it, Carole, for us to jump at it and say, yes, absolutely.
I think about 10 seconds.
Yeah, I think all of
Yeah,
that
maybe.
really. And here we are. So we started planning our weekend in September, and then we thought it might be nice to do this brief webinar this evening to let you know a little bit about how we each work in case you're considering coming to the weekend and you'd like to follow through with more. So I'm going to pass you over to Alex. I don't know, Alex, if you want to say something because you're the second speaker. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, let me speak a little bit about myself. I'm a professional astrologist since 2008, and I run this astrology school here in Albufeira since 2010 officially. And I'm in love with this language, with astrology, as probably you all are a little bit. And I really like to work on a psychological approach to astrology, a therapeutic astrology. And I'm working with private sessions and classes through the year. And it's really a pleasure to be here sharing a little bit of and maybe a new way to use astrology to understand how we can use the tools of this beautiful language to understand in a more powerful way, in a more deep way, what are the relationship and what can we do to improve our relationship.
Thank you, Alex. Carole?
Great. So it's so nice to be here with everybody. I'm going to let my work speak for itself. There's quite a bit of it out there now. I've been an astrologer since 2000, and I spent a long time teaching and organizing and managing at the Faculty of Astrological Studies. Um, Now, of course, I've left the faculty and I run a couple of different organizations. So I run a place called the Centre for Astrology, Myth and Symbol, and I also run a place called Asteria Teaching, and they're both collaborations. I also work for Astrology University in the States, and I'm a guest tutor for Margaret's Relationships and Astrology School. Um, uh, like Alex and also Margaret too, I work broadly in a psychological way, from a psychological perspective. And I think relationships they're important to all of us, you know. They touch all of us, whether it's romantic relationships or family relationships, friendships, work colleagues. Relationships, I think, are one of the most important vehicles that we have for our self-development. And that's not to think about everything from our own point of view necessarily, but we're the one who has control over our own life. We can't control what somebody else does. And so we can understand our relationships if we can focus on at the part that we play in them. And of course, see them as a primary tool for our own self-development. So I really think it's important that we work on understanding our relationships. So astrology, of course, we know is this fantastic tool for understanding ourselves. So it follows that if we apply it to astrology, if we apply it to relationships, then it really helps us to understand why we're in a relationship, the nature of it, and how, as Alex says, how we can improve that.
Thank you, Carole. Just a little bit about my background. I am a psychological astrologer and I'm also a psychotherapist. I work a lot with couples. I've worked a lot with relationship issues. It's always been my fascination, also one of the toughest things in my life. So I think astrology is such a fantastic tool to really help us to figure out why we create certain patterns of relationships, why they repeat, and how they connect with our childhood. For me, it's always about joining the dots and creating those bridges between each other, with each other. And I think at this point in the world where there are so many challenges in the wider collective, I think understanding relationships becomes even more important, because if we can learn how to relate to each other in a loving way, and not, I don't mean loving in a woo-woo kind of way, but literally in a loving, caring way, then it's literally the butterfly effect, isn't it? That can spread. So I think we're kind of really at a huge turning point in the collective. And it feels even more important for us as astrologers to really use this amazing tool we have at our disposal to help us to connect with each other, to understand each other, and to really respect each other, our views, our how we live our lives, and to support each other. And especially with Pluto in Aquarius, we're looking for our tribe. So welcome everyone. It's a delight to be here with you. I'm going to now share the screen and we will launch our evening together. Let me just find the PowerPoint. If you've got questions, do put them in the chat box, and we'll be delighted to address them with you. It may take us a couple of minutes if we don't see them immediately. So here we go, Fated Attractions with Carole, Alex, and myself. So Alex, oh, here's the plan. Sorry, I should have started with the plan. So Alex is going to look at the natal chart. That is always, always the starting point with everything. We are first and foremost individuals who relate to each other. Obviously, this is just a taster session, but we're going to give you a little bit of information to take away with you, hopefully. I'm going to look at the importance of developmental stages, and Carole is going to look at timing, transits, and progressions. So, Alex, I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Margaret. Hello, everyone again. So let's start with something very basic, but we need to start from the beginning. So everything is energy, as probably you all know. This is not new, of course. And everything we attract into our life is a result of our energetic metrics, including relationship. So everything that we have in our life, not only relationship, we can talk about everything that we have in our life, everything that we achieve, everything that comes to us. It comes to us because we have our own energy and we attract something to us. That's why we can talk about fated attractions, because maybe we can relate fate to our relationship, because there's something in our own energy, in our own metrics, in our own birth chart that will give us some tools to understand what kind of energy that we have and why we tend to have the same pattern over and over and over again. That's why we choose this title as well. Fated attractions, like fatal attractions, but actually the fate, the destiny has really, really a big importance here. Can we see the other slide, please, Margaret, if possible? So when we think about relationship, we are considering romantic relationship, of course, in the first place, but also family relationship, friendships, relation with work colleagues, and also with ourselves. I think this is a very important point, because when we talk about relationship, probably our mind will think about the romantic relationship, and of course that will be very, very important. And we all have a lot of work in that subject in our life, but with astrology we can study deeply what are the connections between ourselves and the relationship with our family, with our close friends, with our colleagues in our work, and every kind of relationship. So we need to understand this main point that we can look at all kind of relationship, but the relationship with ourselves, the relationship between the parts of ourselves, the relationship between the planets in our natal chart, of course, will be related to the things that we will live in the relationship with the others. So everything that we have in the relationship with the others is somehow expressed in our natal chart, in our birth chart, in the energy that we have within ourselves. But we know that romantic relationship will require the hardest work. So probably we will use these tools most focused on the romantic relationship. It's a really, really, really important point here. There are several astrology techniques that we can use to explore our relationship dynamics. When we study relationship astrology, we can use tools such as synastry, that we can use two charts and put them together and see what a person's energy can do to other energy, and we can compare two charts and see what we are activating in the other person and what the other person is activating in me. And also we can use the composite chart, where we can merge two charts together and treat that chart as a third person, as a third energy, and see what's resulting from that interaction. So there are several tools that we can use to understand what relationships are, but our natal chart itself is, for me, the main tool that we need to use in the first place, because everything that we have around us is expressed in that natal chart. So we need to start from there. We need to start from our natal chart with the primary relational indicators in our natal chart. So as you may know, the first thing that we need to analyze in our birth chart is the descendant, the seventh house, the sign that we have in the cusp of the seventh house, but also the planets that we have in the seventh house. This is the basic thing that we need to look at, because there's a tendency to be attracted by that energy that symbolically is connected to our seventh house. But of course, we need to see the ruler of our seventh house. For example, if we have Aries in the seventh house, we need to look at Mars. If we have Pisces, like this chart here, we need to look at Jupiter and Neptune. But also we need to look at the planets situated in the seventh house. For example, if you have the Mars in the seventh house, we tend to be attracted by people with some kind of Mars characteristics, more brave or selfish or violent. It depends on the conscious of the people, of course. But that's one of the main things that we need to look at. But it's not the only thing. We need also to look at Venus. Venus is the primary indicator of what we are attached to in terms of magnetism. What do we like? What do we have pleasure? So Venus in our natal chart will talk about what will attract us and what I will be, what do I put value in? What do I value in life, especially in terms of relationship? So of course, it's a really, really important indicator in our chart. Also, of course, Mars, it's the opposite of and complementary of Venus. Mars will talk about our desire. What do we desire in one relationship? What do we want for us? How do we fight for that thing that Venus will like? So it's really important as well to analyze the connection between Venus and Mars and how they work together or not in our natal chart. That will be really, really important to understand one of the basic things in our relationship patterns. And also, of course, the moon, because the moon represents the space that we have in ourselves to receive someone in our life. It will talk about intimacy. It will talk about the ability to create a bond with someone. And for me, the main important thing here is how can we receive something from somebody, including love, of course. So, of course, we will have to talk about the sun. Of course, the sun will represent part of ourselves and represents the nucleus of our personality. What can we, how can we express who we are, our gifts, our way to see love in first place. You see, I tend to look at the sun in astrology as the planet that really talks about love in terms of thinking that love is something that is expressing naturally from us. So the sun will represent something that you naturally give to others, and you can um, care for the other people with the heat from that sun that comes from your heart. So that will be very important to relate to our relationship patterns. And of course, there's this arc of intimacy that is related to the houses in our natal chart. Because when we are in interaction with someone, of course, we are not only interacting with that person, we are taking some patterns, we are taking our experiences, starting from our birth, I would say, but especially the relationship with our parents. So it will all start more seriously in the fourth house. The fourth house, which it will represent the relationship with our mother and father, especially with mother. It depends on the way that you see the fourth house and how you relate to that authority figures in your life, and what are the patterns that you see between your mother and father. But also, we can look at the fifth house, which will talk about the relationship with the flirts and the and our relationship with ourselves in terms of what we can see in us that we can say that is special. How can we deal with the idea of the others looking at us and see that we have something special and something unique? And the sixth house, how can we deal with our imperfections and the imperfections of the other? Because in the fifth house, we can have a real good party and have a real good flirt. And then in the sixth house, symbolically, you will see that the other person has some imperfections and you have some imperfections too. And how can you deal with that? And how can you change some things in yourself so you can adapt to the other person? So finally, you can meet really the other person as an equal in the seventh house. And then go to more deeply connection in the eighth house. So this arc of intimacy, it's something that I can see in my experience that we need to look at very, very carefully. And when I see look very carefully is to see, of course, the planet situated between the fourth and the eighth house, but also the rulers of each cusp of each of these houses. But of course, the chart is a complete thing, so we need to see the chart as a whole. For example, Mercury will also describe how we communicate, but we communicate in several parts of our life, including relationships. So we need to look at Mercury to see how we need to communicate in a proper way. So as you can see, our natal chart is something that contains a lot of information about our relationship patterns. So we should start from here, and then we can see the synastry, we can see the composite chart. But first, we need to know how we work with ourselves, and everything is here.
Thank you, Alex. That was great. And just to let you all know that we're going to have a question and answer session after our presentations. Our presentations are going to be fairly brief, but we will have time, and I'll go through all the questions in the chat box. So if any questions come up, please put them in the chat box in case you're worried you mightn't remember them, and then we'll come to them at the very end. Bear with us. Just to say very quickly, we wanted to tell you a little bit about the weekend in the Algarve. And one of the things is really that most of us don't get a lot of time away from where we live, away from our work, away from our routine, away from our families. This, we wanted to create really an opportunity to have some space away that you could come to and really immerse yourself in studying astrology. And when we say studying, this is not just going to be lecture after lecture after lecture, where there's really going to be a lot of work on yourselves. This is going to be about you really studying your own chart, but from the perspective entirely of your relational life, how you relate to others. So even for astrologers who have done a fair bit of astrology, this is an opportunity to just go a level deeper into why you have created certain relational patterns. So it's going to be a very fun weekend. We're also going to have a session on the beach on the Sunday. There's going to be time to talk with each other, to have lunch together, to have coffee, tea, and wonderful scones together. And there's also Alex is going to do some meditation. So this is going to be a little bit different than being either in a classroom situation or being online. So much of what we've done is online. So we wanted to create something in a really stunning location where we could just immerse ourselves really in this world of relationship, because it's very hard to teach about relationship when we're not actually connecting. So this is really an opportunity to connect. So we'd like you to invite you to come. Alex, Carole, is there anything else you'd like to say about the weekend? Carole, you're muted.
I just wanted to add that for anybody who is not so familiar with relationship astrology techniques, with synastry techniques, we'll be having a session at the beginning on the Thursday afternoon, which addresses the basics of synastry and the composite chart. So if you're a little concerned about how much knowledge you have of these techniques, that's a very valuable session which will help to ease you into the weekend and just maybe refresh your memory about these techniques and how to use them, and just give you some ideas about, give some basic grounding, so that you can start to work with your chart over the course of the weekend.
Thank you, Carole. Alex, anything you'd like to say?
I would like to reinforce that we have all the information in our website. Is this here, Starlight Albufeira. There you can see all the program and more photos of the environment and everything that you need in terms of information you can find there.
Yes, the full program is there. So
Yeah.
the why is, why do we create certain relationships, looking at attachment issues, looking at generational issues, family patterns. The how is, we're going to address the issue of compatibility. What does that mean? Also, the issue of, soulmates, all those things we hear spoken about but don't often get addressed. And then when looking at the timing, why do things happen at a certain time, really from the perspective that there is always a really good reason, even though it may not feel so easy at the time. So if you've just gone through a breakup and you're wondering, oh my goodness, what happened? This is going to be a really good workshop to kind of help to find some meaning. And as humans, we need to find meaning and understanding. That's what really helps us to work through, process, and integrate events that happen. So that's our little sales pitch for the moment. Of course, contact any of us if you have any questions, and please go to the site. All the information is there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about developmental stages. What are they and why do they matter? And just to say that I think astrology is just such an amazing tool because one of the things it offers us is a developmental model of different stages we all go through. And these developmental stages really can act as a framework to understand ourselves and to understand our relationship dynamics. So let's have a look in a little more detail. So what are they? Let's start with basic adolescence. We all know the kind of key things we go through at adolescence. We go through that experience of needing freedom and yet also needing boundaries. So we're talking about the Jupiter transits and the Saturn transits. Also, at adolescence, there's the whole theme of finding our tribe. It's this process of separation and individuation, which occurs throughout our life, of course, which Carl Jung thought us so much about. But at adolescence, it really reaches a peak because we're at that stage of not quite being adults, of course, yet, and not being children anymore. So we are emerging from the womb. We're pushing ourselves out and finding our tribe, usually amidst our peers. So to do that, to separate, to crack that egg, we have got to rebel. That is part of the process. And we all know how hard it is sometimes, in fact, for young people who go through adolescence in families where the parents are really kind of sort of hip parents who really kind of, are rebels themselves, because the young person really struggles to find then something to rebel against. They need something. They also need boundaries. We know how challenging it can be for adolescents when parents want to be the adolescent's best friend and say, oh, everything is fine. You can do whatever you want. And the young person then struggles to internalize those Saturnian boundaries, to internalize a sense of where do I go? How far is this okay? So Uranus comes into the picture, that rebellion. Also, the other thing about adolescence are sexuality and gender issues. This is often the start of young people wanting to engage, beginning to engage in sexual relationships. So we know that stage for anybody who has children. You probably remember that stage. I certainly remember with Sean when it's like he went from, he'll probably be so embarrassed if he hears this, but he went from kind of really not caring what he wore or what he looked like to suddenly being like 2 hours in the bathroom and emerging with all this aftershave. So it's like suddenly there's this metamorphosis from childhood to adolescence to kind of being aware of who is attracted to them. So this is the stage of integrating the beginning of kind of what is it like to be attracted, to feel that flutter, and sometimes also to their first heartbreak. And we all know as parents how hard it is to witness a child going through heartbreak because we just want to save them from it, and yet they've got to go through it. So this is a pretty important stage. Then we come to the first Saturn return at age 29. So by then we know that Saturn has manifested, has touched on and manifested all the planets in our chart. So we're at a point where we are adults, where it's about commitment, responsibility. Where often this is a time that's associated with maybe making more of a commitment in a relationship, where we can't get away with just being the adolescents, where there is an expectation that we learn how to connect with others on a more serious level, with our work colleagues, with our friendships, maybe even having a new home so we get to know what it's like to live with neighbors. Although now with the housing crisis all over, I suspect that many Saturn return people, first Saturn return, are still living with parents. But anyway, that's a whole shift that's changing. Then we come to midlife transits, the Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, Pluto square Neptune square the Uranus opposition. Here we are back to adolescence, but in an older body. And this is the stage where we really take stock. And this starts usually around 36, goes on to about 44. And it's the one stage in life where we know as astrologers that it's the only stage where really we have these three guaranteed transpersonal transits to themselves. So it's major. And this is the stage where we see all the movies of people leaving everything behind, going off into the sunset, breaking up their relationship, feeling like this is their last chance to meet the love of their life if they don't feel they are with the love of their life. Other people are also assessing that maybe, there isn't enough time to have children. Maybe they've left it too late. Maybe they do have a child. For some people, it might be a surprise child or a planned child. The joy of a planned child that maybe comes later in life and the shock of an unplanned child. This is often the time of changing career. And again, in terms of relationships, sexuality and gender issues can come to the fore. So it's an opportunity to relive, to finish, to integrate some of the issues that we may not have had a chance to integrate and work through at adolescence. But we're in a very different stage developmentally in our body. Chiron return at age 50, huge threshold crossing. Often the stage where if we're in a relationship, we're truly assessing, do I want to spend this last third of my life with this person? Do I want to grow old with them or not? This might be my chance to have another relationship. Or if somebody is not in a relationship, it might be, do I want a relationship? Am I getting too old? Am I enjoying being on my own? What's going on here? There can be a vulnerability in terms of the body changing. It can be a time of maybe embracing a new career or maybe considering, when do I want to retire? Do I want to retire? Certainly a time of assessing what have I learned. And definitely, as I said, unhappy relationship reckoning time. It's like, I've put up with this all these years, enough. Second Saturn return, an awareness of time running out. Do I want somebody to grow old with? Do I want to grow old with this person? People often have a lot of friendship groups that anchor them at the second Saturn return. Very different period of time than the first Saturn return. A real awareness of time going by quickly. What do I want to do? What is my priority? Maybe relationship is no longer a priority, or maybe it is a priority. If somebody has been in a relationship all their life, maybe it's going along comfortably, and maybe there's a desire to write a book, to do something that we haven't done before. Saturn can help us manifest that. And the last transit to mention doesn't mean it's the only one, but the Uranus return at 84. Here there can be enormous freedom from responsibilities, depending, of course, on our financial state and more importantly, depending on our health and well-being. So our body may feel old, but there may be still a desire to have fun and enjoy life. And I'll talk about that in a second longer. Why do these stages matter? They matter because we have different needs, different priority, resources, and desires often at different developmental stages. Also, keep in mind that relationships we get involved in, they reflect the transits. So if we get involved with somebody when we've got Pluto square Pluto, that relationship is going to resonate with that Pluto square Pluto energy. Now, think in terms also of children's charts. Parents sometimes forget that your children's charts are a constant transit chart to your chart. So you cannot get away from that transit. Plus, also consider things like developmentally hormonal changes. Think of the hormonal changes at adolescence versus hormonal changes at menopause. And the first meeting chart, permanent transit chart to the relationship. So that's why developmental stages really matter. So this is just to give you a small taster. And Leah, I wanted to mention Leah, and I was saying to Carole and Alex why I brought up this example. I'm not going to look at her chart in terms of exploring it, but Leah was born in November 1915, the 29th of November. And I met Leah in 2004 when I first went to live in Honolulu. I met her on the beach. It was a beach that was called Gray's Beach, like my surname. And she very kindly came up and started chatting to me and told me that I could be part of their group. The group consisted of people all over the age of about 79, I'd say. They were a wonderful group of people, made me feel at home. So in 2004, Leah was 89. She had been married. She was a widow. And what Leah taught me, one of the most important things, and she asked me to please use her chart far and wide because it would be her way of being known and being remembered. She passed away about 10 years ago, by the way. But she always she taught me something very valuable about relationships because she used to tell me she used to love dancing. Very, very cognitively aware lady, very fit and healthy. And she used to love going dancing. And I used to say to her, oh, would you like to meet somebody? And she said, absolutely, she said, but I don't want to meet anybody my age, she said, because they're all really old. She said, I may look older, she said, to you, but in my mind, she said, I'm still in my 40s. And just something to remember that our body may go through developmental changes, but in our heart, in our mind, we still have the desire nature that's in our chart. We still find certain things attractive, certain people. So never to assume with age that that desire goes away. So yeah, her words were literally, I don't want to dance with an old man. They are all very wrinkly. So I'm going to leave you with that and pass you over to Carole.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you to Leah, reminding us that you're never too old. So we'll also be looking at timing in relationships, and Margaret has spoken a little bit to this. I mean, an obvious thing to say here is that no relationship is static. We meet someone at a particular time in our lives when that person represents or they bring us something which is very important for our own self-realization, for our own self-development. We might not necessarily appreciate that at the time, but it sets a process in motion. And we can look at the timing of transits, progressions and directions. We're using our ordinary techniques. We can use those to each of the individual's charts, of course, and we can also look at the composite chart, which is the chart of the relationship itself. So what is the third energy, the combined energy that's created when those two particular people come together? So we're using transits, progressions, and directions to chart the stages and the seasons of the relationship. And those planetary movements and cycles can help us, firstly, to understand why things happen at a certain point in our relationship, and also how that relationship develops over time, and perhaps why also. So we can use the planetary cycles and planetary transits to chart the development of the relationship itself, and also, of course, how it unfolds for each of those individuals. So, for example, we can look at the transits for the start of the relationship to each partner's chart. And the relationship is going to mean something different to each of them. And this is important because I think this is often why two people start to encounter problems later on, because their reasons for being with each other are very different. And again, Margaret has spoken to a little bit of that, looking at planetary cycles, but we can think about why we start a relationship, the transits, the progressions, the directions that are occurring for ourselves at that particular moment in time. They set something in motion for us. And the reason that we are in a relationship, which may differ very much from the reasons that our partner is in the relationship. If we're watching our own transits unfolding, we're seeing the tide of our own lives unfolding. And that may at times be out of sync with the tides that are happening in the chart of our partner. And of course, then there's this third thing, the relationship itself. So it becomes quite a complex picture, but one which we can track and find the meaning of when we're looking at the transits and the progressions and the directions to each of the individual charts and also to the relationship chart. We see that whole developmental journey for both parties. And a relationship is a bit like an alembic. If anybody here is into alchemy, a relationship is like an alembic. And the transits then reflect the alchemical processes of change that are taking place within that vessel, within that alembic. So we can use the timing, our timing techniques, to deepen our understanding of what the relationship means, what's its purpose. And this will almost inevitably change over time as the people in the relationship change. We can use them to help us identify, for instance, when things may be over. We can start then to move beyond the notion that a relationship fails. We can start to think much more in terms of the idea that the relationship, any relationship, has its own natural arc. And the transits, the progressions, the directions will tell us something of that. It will tell us perhaps something of when it might end for one person, but of course the transits and the progressions, etc., are going to be very different for the partner. So we can start to work with those differences when we're looking at these techniques.
What exactly was our commander-in-chief?
It isn't always obvious what it is that begins a relationship for somebody or what it is that ends it for somebody. And there's undoubtedly going to be an unconscious element to all of that, of which neither party is particularly aware. We can use the transits to the composite and the individual charts, of course, charting the progress of the relationship and the meaning of it for each of those people. What season is it in? How does each person relate to it at any given time? And knowledge of the transits then allows us to reframe our relationship experiences much more from the perspective of what did I learn from that? How was I changed by that relationship? We start to put it into the context of the broader context of our lives. And this is just a random example of Charlie and Max. And again, you know, this echoes back to some of the things that Margaret was saying. So if Charlie and Max were in a relationship together and Charlie, the relationship starts when Charlie is experiencing the Chiron return and with Saturn crossing the descendant. Margaret was talking then, I'll refer you back to the things that Margaret was talking about in terms of the Chiron return. So that's the time of working on also.
Sorry, Carole, I think I muted you. My apologies. There was noise going on with other people, so I muted you. I think you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, that's okay. Don't worry. Don't worry. So for Charlie beginning the relationship at the Chiron return, that's going to be a very particular feeling, and some of the themes that might mark the beginning of the relationship is an echo back to ancestral themes, to themes from early family life. Margaret was talking about the Chiron return as a rite of passage, and so it is, and perhaps into a wiser, more holistic way of living. We become perhaps less concerned at the Chiron return about what others want from us, but that might be only one way of seeing it. And Saturn crossing the descendant, of course, there's the possibility that what Charlie is looking for in that relationship is longevity, permanence. They may be ready to commit to somebody. And that's a very different feeling to Max here in our example, where Max is going through the progressed new moon. and with Uranus crossing the IC. So Uranus crossing the IC, maybe Max is ready to move on from a particular situation that they happen to be in to start a new cycle. We know that a new cycle often starts when a planet crosses the IC. That's the idea there of making a break with the past. So that's quite a different sort of set of circumstances. And the progressed new moon, we know that that's like a seed being set in the dark, but you can't necessarily see what's ahead. And so there's a sense of beginning a new cycle or beginning a new chapter. So very different. And so for Max, they may not be ready to settle yet. Whereas for Charlie, that might be a very different thing. So we can use the transits and use the progressions and so on just to see what the tide is at the beginning of the relationship and at all of the stages that it goes through. And we'll be exploring, of course, all of this in detail in the workshop. It gives you a chance to look at your own transits and progressions and think about your relationships in terms of those.
Thank you, Carole. I'm just putting this slide up, so if you want to look up a little bit more information on the work we do, feel free to do so. And I'm going to stop sharing now, and we'll have a look at all the questions in the chat box. So let me have a look and go through them. You can also put your hand up. There's a little reaction thing at the bottom. If there's something you'd like to ask that you didn't ask in it, let's have a look. I'm looking through everything. Let's have a look. Great comments about where you're all from. Let's have a look. What is the speaker's opinions on the usage of orrery astrology when asking, when will I find love? Something like this, or when will we be together or marry? Is it a valid tool, or should we stick to synastry, composite, transits, or progressions? Well, I don't do orrery astrology at all. It's a very predictive tool. I'm a psychological astrologer, so I can't answer that. I don't know, Alex or Carole, if either of you use orrery as
I don't use that too.
Okay.
I don't, but what I would say is I think horary can be just as psychological as any other form. It depends on the user. And also, horary perhaps answers the question of when will I find love, but it doesn't necessarily answer the question of why. I think there's a much deeper view that you can get from the natal chart, and a horary chart is nothing really unless you're looking at it in the context of the natal chart too. So it's a spin-off chart. It's not, we read it as a standalone chart, but it's also rooted in the picture of the natal chart. So you really need to go back to the natal chart. So you can use both. I mean, I think we get to the same place in the long run. The seeker has the answer to their question if it's a genuine mode of seeking or genuine sense of wanting to know, but different ways of getting there.
You know, it kind of reminds me also, you know, with tarot cards of picking a card and saying, I'm just going to pick one card, and then you don't like the card and you think, oh, I'm just going to pick another card and keep going. It can be a little bit like that, I think, with astrology tools, that we find it, we use a tool and then we don't like the answer. And we're looking for other tools to confirm what we really want. So maybe the question is, why are we asking this, you know, at this particular time? And really thinking what's behind my concern or my question. That might be something just to consider. There's a question here. Let me see. Aries is my descendant. So Mars ruled, which is in my 12th house, conjunct Pluto in Libra. Sorry, I'm struggling to read it.
So Scorpionic.
Yeah, in Scorpionic. What about Venus is my chart ruler? Okay, so I'm not sure what the question is there. Would somebody, whoever put that question, would you like to unmute yourself and tell us what the question is? Oops. Maybe not. Maybe it was just a statement.
Saying I don't have a question, it's just sharing.
Okay, maybe just sharing. Perfect. Wonderful. I relocated cross country around my Uranus opposition. Yes, a great time to move. I'm single and turning 50 in September. There's the Chiron return. Jupiter-Uranus conjunction just happened in my 7th, so I am hopeful. Okay.
Someone was asking, is this also a good event for people with no relationship experience? Totally.
Oh, absolutely, because we're all relating to people every day. Unless
Yes.
you're a hermit in a cave, with absolutely nobody on a desert island with nobody. And even then, you're relating to nature. We are all relating to everybody every moment of our lives. As soon as we go out our door, we're meeting the person at the store, we're meeting our neighbor, we're smiling at somebody in the street. We have had a childhood, all of us. So we have had relationships all of our lives. So, absolutely, this is wonderful for anybody, for all of us.
I'm just wondering if the question is no relationship experience or no experience of relationship astrology.
Oh, good question. Whoever
Mm,
asked this that question, do unmute yourself and tell us. Okay, that
I would
was
say totally for both because we will talk about the basics, right? So even if you don't have any experience with relationship astrology, it's totally okay.
Yeah, but you do need the basics of astrology. You need to know what the planets are, what the signs are, what the aspects are, what the houses are. You do need the basics in astrology. Otherwise, you're going to maybe get a little lost. But certainly you don't, if you don't have the techniques of synastry and composite charts. As Carole said, we're going to do an additional class on the Thursday evening for
Yeah.
anybody who wants to learn those techniques. You don't need to know anything about relationship astrology, but you do need to have the basics of astrology. You can be self-taught or have done some courses, but make sure you know what the houses are. If we don't have planets in a house, but it straddles through 2 signs, should we look to the planetary rulers for both signs or just the one on the cusp for more info about the house? Well, there's only one house that is on the cusp. So we always look, the ruler is the house on the cusp.
Yes. I think
Yeah.
people have answered that for me actually.
Oh,
Thank
perfect.
you.
Wonderful. Of course.
Yeah. I do have quite a lot of empty houses and a lot of clusters, so I was interested to know what I do with 3 planets in a 4th to 8th house arc. I've just literally got 3 planets. But yeah, look to the ruler, which is
Yeah.
the ruler of the sign on the cusp.
Mm.
And then what sorry, I don't want to take too much time up with you, but what do you do then? So I've got Sag on the cusp of my 4th, so I looked at Jupiter moon in my 8th. I mean, that's where I've always gone for my relationship sort of knowledge about my chart. Is that it? Maybe.
Yes, well, the ruler of a house is going to give you more information about the matters of that house. So rulership can be really important in terms of knitting together the whole picture of the chart.
Mm.
So that's yeah. If you want to know about your 4th house experiences of home and family and so on, what roots you, what makes you feel, as gives you a sense of belonging, and you're looking at Jupiter and what Jupiter is doing in the chart. And that echoes back to what Alex was talking about in his piece right at the top, which is, there's the ruler of the ascendant, there's the ruler of the descendant. We're looking at that. That starts to complicate things, it creates a picture. And then we're looking at Venus for relationships and what house does Venus rule? So we've got quite an integrated picture that we can look at, and we can use the house rulerships to help us link different
Yeah.
parts of the chart together.
Yes, thanks. It's pulling it all together that isn't it's not
Yeah.
that I
Yeah,
suppose
well,
we're
we'll be doing,
complex.
yeah, absolutely. We'll be doing quite a lot of that in the
Yeah.
workshop, just
Great.
having a
Okay.
bit more
Thank you.
picture.
Thanks.
It's why it's kind of good to be in a workshop setting, because that's where you can pull all the pieces together and ask those questions. and bring it alive rather than just a flat presentation, if that makes sense. There's a great question here. Is it okay to study your partner's chart when they don't know astrology? It seems an unequal situation. How do you handle this?
Mm.
That's interesting. Alex and Carole, what do you think?
I tend to work first on the person that studies astrology and likes astrology, and only if the other person allows and with a with something proved, I would study the chart of the other person. Um, well, I'm talking about an astrologer, okay? If we are talking about someone in a relationship and the partner doesn't study astrology or doesn't like astrology, I would respect that and probably not use the astrology tools to look at his energy or her energy.
I use it for my own understanding, but my partner doesn't know anything about astrology. So I don't talk to him about it because it wouldn't mean anything to him. And then that unbalances the relationship, I think. But, you know, when I first met him and he first came down to stay with me at my mother's house, he went around straightening up all the pictures on the walls. He's got Virgo rising. And of course, I was killing myself laughing that this is what he was doing. But that's my own private thing. You know, that's I understand him through the lens of the chart that I know belongs to him. But if I'd said that to him, he would have just, you know, he wouldn't have meant anything to him. So I just laughed and walked off.
I think it's really a personal thing, you know, and who you're with. I've had partners who love astrology and want me to explain it, and partners who don't, who kind of weren't remotely interested. So I think it's entirely, I would always ask somebody's permission to look at their chart. And similarly, if clients come to me and say, I want to look at my partner's chart, my question is always, you need to get their permission. So as long as they're okay with it, that's totally fine. Obviously, if somebody's passed away, then you know, they're not here to give permission, so that's okay. But it's always in relation to who the person is in the room. So if you come on the course, absolutely bring charts of loved ones. Make sure you've asked permission, and that's totally fine, you know, because it's always in relation to ourselves. You know, we're basically narcissistic creatures. We want to know about us and how we tick. So their chart is in relation to us. Now, if two people are in a room and we're doing couples astrology, that's very different than we're looking at both charts. But I think if it's about you, I agree with Carole that it's such a great framework. You know, it would be like saying to me, you know, if you've got a partner, do you think about them in psychotherapy terms? Well, I do within my own head. That doesn't mean that I necessarily would share all of it with them. It helps me to understand a little bit more. They're all just frameworks, aren't they? And tools like people use numerology or tarot or whatever that help us. And anything to me that improves our relationships, that helps us connect more, is just really wonderful. That's my thinking. So before we need to come to an end fairly shortly, but just wondering if anybody has any final questions. There's some great discussions here. There's a question here. If one person has the ruler of the descendant or Venus moon, whoops, oh, maybe I lost that one. Okay, I think that was already replied to. Apologies.
Embedded dignity, could it be a sign that is a karmic punishment so that the person will have no success with relationship?
I don't personally, that wouldn't be my belief system at
No,
all.
no, not, yeah.
I
Me
would
too.
use modern astrology anyway, so I wouldn't interpret planets that way. I really think, to me, it's all about growth. All relationships are about us growing and learning about ourselves and each other and supporting each other. So I don't believe that that there's any karmic thing in terms of having a bad or unsuccessful relationship. I think it's all about learning. I do think that sometimes there are relationships that are karmic relationships in terms of maybe, you know, a lot of past life connections. And sometimes one person may want to continue that relationship and the other person may not. But I certainly don't believe it's a punishment. Carole, Alex, what do you think?
Totally, I totally agree with you, Margaret. It's all about working on ourselves.
Yeah.
It's all about working that position in our chart to leave that position in a more higher energy level, I would say.
I was also struck by something that Liat said, where you were talking about being at the Uranus half return, and but your mother died at the Uranus return, and those are the kinds of things I think are really um, the those things are triggers. Those are the things that we need to be taking notice of, because I think um, we understand, or the psyche memory holds those experiences, and that becomes important. So something there is resonating to the Uranus cycle. So I think with when we're looking at relationships, just as when we're looking at natal chart, our own natal chart, we are trying to we're trying to pull out of a more unconscious space, or a place where we don't really understand or can't see, something that can allow us to understand why something happened, why something is being re-evoked at a particular moment in time. And we can use the planetary cycles to do that. And we can think about ages and stages. What happened to your parents at the age that you are now at? What happened to them at the stage that you happen to be at if you're going through a particularly difficult time in your relationship? Those are the things that we can use astrology with its notion of cycles to really help to deepen our understanding.
One last question here, and then we will close up. Isn't modern astrology sometimes biased towards optimism? That's what makes me cautious when it comes to modern astrology. That's something that's often said of modern astrology. And you know how I would explain modern astrology versus traditional is that modern astrology is couched and based in free will and choice. And so nothing is determined. We have choices. I do believe the chart is a map for how we can express and grow towards our greatest potential. And I believe the modern astrology, and certainly psychological astrology, helps us to navigate, to really use the transits, to flow with them, to develop, to expand and grow. So I wouldn't say it's optimism. I mean, if optimism equates with having free will and choice, then yes, maybe we're optimistic. But I would call it more about really that we can always express the energies in our chart at their most limited or at their most expansive. That is up to us. It's also up to circumstances in our life, because for a child growing up in a war zone or a child growing up in a very wealthy part of the world, there's going to be very different experiences and opportunities. So I think we have to consider everything in that. But I think it just isn't deterministic like more traditional astrology. Having said that, I think there are excellent tools in both. And if you're drawn more towards traditional astrology, then that's maybe what serves you best and serves your clients best. So I think always use the tools that you feel more aligned with and that speak to you, because that's what will make you a really good astrologer. Carole, Alex, anything you want to say about that?
I agree 100% with you, Margaret.
I think it can be hard work for the person, you know, when you look at your own chart, there's a degree of self-honesty that's required in looking at it, and that's never easy. So I don't think it's about necessarily kind of Pollyanna optimism, but about trying to help somebody to understand the meaning behind a certain experience.
It's
It's
having
about
to
it's
do the
about
work.
work as well, personal
Yes,
work.
yes. The personal work, doing the work, that the work of consciousness, the work of
Yeah.
digging into the eighth and the 12th house, the work of healing ancestral and family patterns, which is hard. It's much easier to think, oh, I behave like this. It's a bit like saying, oh, Mercury's retrograde, so it's okay for me to miscommunicate all the time, and take no responsibility. So Yeah, I think it is about taking that responsibility, our own responsibility for our own. And what is that? There's some kind of quote or meme or whatever that, that the best gift we can give somebody else in a relationship, that goes for family, friends, or whatever, is to heal ourselves, to become conscious of our own patterns and behaviors. That's really our gift to somebody else. It's not about fixing the other person. It's about really working on ourselves. So, on that note, I think we're going to bring this to a close. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And thank you to everyone who's listening to this recording. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with us. All the information is on the slides, how to get in touch. And it's been a joy being here with you this evening on this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction day. I hope you all had a wonderful day and that it's a wonderful start to this new 14-year cycle. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone. Bye.
Bye,
And
everyone.
hope to see you in September.
Yes, we're going to be there anyway because Carole and I are desperate for sunshine because we live in Armagh. Okay? So regardless, we're going to be on that beach with Alex. So yes, we'd
Oh,
love
yeah.
that. We're going to have fun there. So yeah, do come along. It'll be a lovely weekend. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
I'm going to stop the recording.